Hey guys, it's Thomas, and welcome back to my channel. I've been a university student for the last 4 years. Now, university can be a great, but often stressful time, and over my 4 years here, I've kind of run the gauntlet of things that can stress me out. These have included, but are entirely not limited to, the degree workload, my position as school president for physics and astronomy, being a society president, various interpersonal issues, accommodation, and just trying to keep a reasonable sleep schedule. That one's quite difficult. So, you might wonder, how do I keep sane? Now, before I say anything further, I wouldn't be doing my due diligence if I didn't say this. If you feel you are near breaking point, go speak to someone. Speak to your university student services, speak to your friends, a member of staff that you trust. Go speak to somebody. This is not a quick fix guide, these are largely preventative measures. Take care of yourself, and please go ask for help. The first technique that I use to manage my stress is to prioritise. As any student that's spent any time at university knows, there is so much going on here. You have student societies, you have positions of academic representation, you've got positions in the union, you've got sports clubs, you've got your actual degree that you want to do. There is so much, and yes, that was a little overwhelming. This is the problem, especially with the start of university. There is so much to do, so much that you want to do, and so much that you have the opportunity to do potentially for the first time. You can't do everything. So my advice is get a bit of paper, get a pen, and write a list of everything that you want to do. All of the things you're interested in, and then rank them. When you're trying to manage your stress, the most important thing is your well-being. Not anything else, not the degree, not your extracurriculars, not anyone else. It is your well-being. Your well-being is the priority. Next, you're at university for a degree. That has to go next. Put in that as the second thing in your ranked list of things that are important to you. After that, it's up to you. Pick the societies you're most interested in. If there's 2 societies that you want to be on the committee for, figure out which one you care more about. You can still be on the committee for both, but maybe one of them you run for an exec position, president, treasurer, secretary, and then the other one you just run for something like a general committee member, something a bit less taxing in terms of time. The one thing you really have to consider, that once you've got your list of things that are important to you in order, is when you draw that line below which you have to leave things and not do them, there still needs to be a gap at the top of your bandwidth bar for when things expand, when you get landed with that big essay, that big lab report, the coding project that takes 3 times as long as you think it's going to. You need that extra bandwidth to allow things to swell a bit. Maybe you have a bit of a rough week and you need to spend more time on your well-being. Maybe your society's having its annual ball and you need to spend more time on that. You need time that you can use for those sorts of things. That's my first bit of advice anyway. My second bit of advice for staying sane at university and managing your stress is to learn to say no to things. This is probably the second most important thing after prioritising, because you have to be able to say to something or say to somebody, no, I don't have the time or bandwidth or ability to deal with this right now. Your list is going to be really long, most likely, if your university has a lot of stuff going on, which is probably going to have. After you get to your point where you can't take anything else, you're going to have to say no. This skill is also especially important if you're going to take on roles of responsibility in societies, or in academic representation, or in the students' union. If you're going to take on positions of extra responsibility, you're going to have people that are going to come along and say, hey, can you do this thing? And you've got to be able to say no, because eventually people are just going to take you for granted. There is a slight subcategory to learning to say no, however. The other skill I'd recommend you learn is how to be tactically non-committal. Now, my third piece of advice is probably more useful for somebody who's in a position of responsibility. As long as you're a volunteer and not expected to be paid for something, if you're really busy and you don't have time to deal with unnecessary emails, set up an out-of-office email. This is a quick standard response that goes out to anyone who emails you while you have it turned on. It's a really good way to cut down on unnecessary things. So say you've got somebody emailing you about a project that's maybe 6 weeks away and you don't really need to worry about it right now. You don't have to respond to it. They get a quick response saying, hey, I'm out of office, or hey, I'm busy with this thing. I'm not going to get back to you until at least this date. It's a really good way to cut down on distractions, cut down on extra workload building up while you're dealing with something. I've used them around stressful times in my personal life. I've also used them around stressful times in my academic life when I've had big deadlines, or when I've been working on society stuff. I've had, say, Highland Ball with Celtic Society. It's a really good tactic for avoiding emails if you get a lot of them. Highly recommend. Now, some of those have been fairly specific to people who have these additional roles. The next one is very general. Get ahead on important things. Two things that come to mind here are accommodation and internships. Two things that can be very stressful, are very important, and they're a lot easier to deal with if you deal with them early. Let's start with accommodation. When you're applying for flats, you want to make sure you've got all the information that you're going to need for the application before the flat is advertised, so you can get through these applications really quickly and nobody can beat you to the punch and steal the flat away. The thing is, you're going to have to do this well in advance to minimise on stress. Make sure you know who you're looking for flats with, make sure you've all got your character references, decide who the lead tenant's going to be, get your landlord references, all the stuff that you need for an application form, get that stuff before any flats start appearing. The same thing goes for internships. Write your CV well before internships are coming up. If internships are starting to appear in semester 2, write your CV in semester 1. You want to make sure you've got the stuff ready. That way you've only got to do small tweaks to your CV before you submit it for each position that you're applying for. To sum it up, if it's going to be stressful later, start it early. Now, for technique number 5, I'm going to use a bit of an analogy. I'm going to use the analogy of an athlete. Now, no athlete can do absolutely every sport. They don't have the time to invest in becoming really good at all of them. They have to choose the ones they're most passionate about and stick with those. Now, this should sound familiar. That was technique number 1, prioritise. There's something else an athlete cannot do. An athlete cannot run full pelt all the time. They will get tired and they will injure themselves. They'll get burnt out. Nobody can run full pelt all the time. The same goes with you and work. You cannot work all the time. You've got to make sure to ring fence time for things that aren't work. I'm going to say that again. Ring fence time for stuff that isn't work. You can't spend every waking moment doing your degree and then running straight to the society that you're running and then going to your part-time job and then coming home and dealing with emails for your union role or your school president role. You're gonna burn out eventually. You might be able to manage it for a wee while, but you can't do it forever. You need the downtime, and you've got to ring fence it. So say there's a society you really like going to. This is quite an easy thing to say, yes, I'm going to go to this every week, and as long as you keep actually going to it, then that is a nice ring fence time. If you're not the sort of person who goes to a regular society, so I go to Celtic Society, we have classes every week. If you're in, say, I don't know, Physics Society, who have an event every 2 weeks, that's not quite as easy to say, this is a regular slot that I go and do this thing in. You're going to have to be have a bit more agency to it. These sorts of things are great. Make sure you ring fence time for them. They're important. Don't work all the time. One other thing that I got quite good at over lockdown was making sure that I got all of my work done, all my university work, done by 5 o'clock, done by tea time. So I would work from 9 till 5, like you do with a job, have my dinner, and then wouldn't work in the evening, something I'm not particularly effective at anyway. So I would work until dinner time, have my dinner, and then after that it's downtime to do other stuff, whether it's something a little lighter like society, president stuff, or it's relaxing. Speaking of relaxing though, you have to make sure that you have multiple outlets for stress. Now for this penultimate technique for staying sane at university, I've got 2 pie charts. One here, and one here. Now I've already talked about ring fencing time for things that aren't work. Now I'm going to say that the things that you do that aren't work need to have variety. So we're going to start off by looking at this pie chart. This pie chart is 90% red and 10% blue. Now this pie chart could, for example, be the pie chart for downtime of somebody who spends 6 nights a week and a Saturday afternoon playing football with their friends, and then on a Saturday night spends a couple of hours playing piano. In normal times, this might be a brilliant way to have downtime. It might work really well for this person. The one thing it doesn't have is any redundancy. It has essentially no redundancy. The piano bit, a little bit, but not very much. What I mean is that if something were to suddenly happen, maybe this person falls over at football and breaks their leg, or they get sick, or maybe there's a global pandemic that means you can't see people and play football for months on end. Suddenly, 90% of this pie chart, gone. Now suddenly you've got this tiny sliver of your normal downtime, and suddenly you're not coping quite so well. This is what happened when the COVID-19 pandemic hit. People who were used to going out and doing loads of things socially suddenly started having a really hard time because they didn't have their normal outlets for stress. Introverts like me, we didn't have quite as bad a time because we're used to doing things on our own, on our computers in our room. Okay, maybe it's just nerds, but still, you get the idea. Now let's look at pie chart number 2. Now this is my pie chart without all its labels. This is far more redundant. So let's fill it in. This big blue chunk. This is my dancing. I do Scottish country dancing and it's something that I love to do. It's how I met my partner, it's something that really helps me de-stress. It is, however, also the most susceptible to freak accidents and pandemics. We lost dancing for a really long time over COVID and it wasn't fun. Fortunately, I had most of these other sections. The next 3 sections here fall under the umbrella term of content creation, all the stuff that I do online that I find really fun because it's something a bit different from physics. There's my YouTube channel, this red section, you're watching that right now. There is my Twitch channel in purple, that is twitch.tv/TomAstroSci, where I do science streams with like past papers, I do study streams, I do game streams. You should go follow it if you're not already. And then there's my photography, which I mostly post to Instagram, stock photo websites, and I'm doing some sort of private hire stuff now as well. That bit is a little bit more work, but I really enjoy it and it's very creative, so I'm having it on the downtime. Now the photography can be cut down quite a bit because if you break your leg it's hard to go and take photos. If there's a pandemic then you may not want to go and do like event hire, but there isn't that much that can stop me doing YouTube or Twitch. They're pretty difficult to disrupt unless my internet goes out. Now the final 5 sections here are just hobbies that would take quite a lot to disrupt. Music, video games, reading books, consuming content like Netflix and YouTube, and painting Warhammer figures. These are just fun. They're also quite difficult to take away, but they're also the ones that can most easily expand to compensate if something goes away. Say I break my leg and I can't go and dance. I can watch more Netflix, I can play more video games. These are things that I can do and it's probably going to be okay. These are the sections of the pie that expanded when I lost dancing at the start of the pandemic. I could add a lot more things to this pie chart to make it even more redundant, but it's very redundant as it is. If you want to remove things from this pie chart, you have to do a hell of a lot to remove enough that I would have a real trouble coping. This means that my pie chart is very redundant. Unlike the one we saw earlier, where losing football would be devastating to the person who only has a little bit of other downtime. Having multiple outlets helps you stay sane even if something goes wrong, even when something goes wrong. You can do one of these other things that you love in its place. It also has the wonderful side effect of making you a far more interesting person that people want to be around, which is always nice. We like interesting people. You're an interesting person, but you can be even more interesting if your pie chart looks like this. You can add in other stuff. And my final technique is to embrace the days when your body just says no. These come around more often than I'd like to admit sometimes, but sometimes you just reach the point where you can't really face getting up. You need a few more hours in bed. Sometimes that's okay. Sometimes you're going to have to get up because you've got to go and do stuff. You've got to go to work. You've got to go meet somebody. You've got a class test. Some days you really do have to get up. But if you're a university student, chances are you've got a lot of agency over your own time, especially if you've got lecture capture. In my opinion, it's better to take those 3 hours to rest and get the rest you need and work effectively through the afternoon and maybe a little into the evening than it is to force yourself out of bed and work ineffectively for longer. You'll just end up really annoyed and really irritable. So sometimes accept that your body is just saying no. If it's every day, that's a problem. Go speak to student services or some other mental health counselling or something like that. But if it's the occasional day, it's not the end of the world if you just say, you know what, I'm going back to bed. So, those are my techniques for staying sane at university. I hope they're useful to you. If you used any of them before or you have any that I didn't say, put them in the comment section down below. If you're new, make sure to subscribe while you're down there, and if you're looking for something else to watch, then why don't you have a look at some of these. There's one there that I've picked out, and the other one has been suggested by YouTube. I hope to see you in the next video, and I hope you have a very good rest of your day. See ya.